in the CEDAW Convention Speaker Series being hosted by Equality Bahamas. We've had 2 sessions before. The first one was on Articles 1 and 2 with Patricia Schultz, and we had the second session on Article 3 with Esther Agabami and Mshelia. If you're interested in those, they are recorded. They are on YouTube. We will put those links in the chat momentarily so you can check those out after this session, which is on Article 4 of CEDAW, which focuses on special measures. We'll be dropping the text to that article in the chat as well, so you can have a chance to read it. But we are going to be guided through expertly by our very own Bahamian human rights expert, Gaynel Curry. For the duration of the session, you are welcome to participate. Please use the chat throughout the presentation, but we ask that you just wait until the presentation is concluded before using any mics. It's easiest, it's best if you raise your hand to let us know that you want to say something, just to make sure that we cut down on the crosstalk. Let's try our best to be succinct because we do have a short time. Try to be as succinct as possible in your interventions, your questions, comments, ideas that you share with us today. Of course, this is a feminist space, so we are centering women. We welcome people of all genders to join, but we do center women in this space. So just be mindful of, if you're not a woman, the space that you take up, and ensure that we have really respectful dialogue. We are open to disagreements and different ideas and different perspectives, as long as we maintain that mutual respect among ourselves. And we are also really fortunate to be joined by CEDAW committee member, Bahamian attorney Marian Bethel, who will introduce Gaynel. So I'm turning over to Marian now.
Okay, Alicia, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. I'm in Geneva right now and connecting to this wonderful series. Thank you. And so to Gaynel, I am so pleased that you are doing this article with us. And I so admire the work that you do, the human rights work that you have done for the most of your professional life. I admire and respect it. You and I had an opportunity to work together when you were director of the Department of Gender and Family Affairs in Nassau, and we traveled to Grand Bahama to promote awareness around CEDAW. And so, Gaynel, I just want to say thank you so much for staying the course in this human rights area. You have a general and deep understanding of human rights in all of its forms. And I really love that you are an advocate for women's human rights in particular. And thank you for working with me so arduously and diligently on CEDAW workshops. In the past 3, 4, 5 years, we've been on the ground in Nassau doing workshops together. I appreciate the collaboration and the expertise and the professionalism and passion that you bring to this work. Thank you. So Gaynel Curry is an independent expert member of the United Nations Permanent Forum of People of African Descent, which serves as a platform for improving the safety and quality of life and livelihood of people of African descent. Gaynel has worked with the UN for more than 23 years in various capacities and duty stations, including in Afghanistan, South Sudan, Timor-Leste. Most recently, she served as human rights advisor in the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva, where she led work on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development within the Human Rights Council. Gaynel Curry oversaw the work of the OHCHR New York office in support of the International Decade for People of African Descent and assisted with the work of the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. She has held several positions in the government of the Bahamas, including director of the Department of Gender and Family Affairs. She is currently in Nassau as an adjunct faculty member at the University of the Bahamas and provides independent consultancy services on a broad range of human rights issues. Gaynel Curry holds a master's degree in international human rights law from the University of Oxford, United Kingdom, a master's degree in international affairs from the American University in Washington, DC, a degree in law from the University of London, a Bachelor of Arts degree in history and social sciences from the University of the West Indies, Jamaica, and an advanced diploma in public policy from the College of the Bahamas. Gaynel, thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Marian, for that very, very moving to me anyway, introduction. It's a pleasure to work with you as well. I love this space. I love doing this work. And thanks also to Alicia and Lauren who are working closely with us on this series. I'm truly honored to be a part of it. So hello everyone, and I am going to walk you through Article 4 of the Convention on the Convention of all forms, the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, CEDAW. So I think the PowerPoint should be up, and you should just have my sort of introductory. So as we know, Article 4 deals with temporary special measures. And Lauren and I had the occasion just the other day to be on a talk show with Erin Green to talk a little bit about what temporary special measures are about. And what I got from that discussion, it was a very good discussion, and I thank Erin for having us there, and Lauren for joining me on that in that discussion. But what I got from colleagues and family members is that they needed to have a little bit more of a background on what we meant by temporary special measures, where does it come from, so forth and so on. And I took that point. It wasn't possible for us to go into that level of detail in given the length of time we had on that talk show. But I'm hoping to start with a little bit of a background on what is CEDAW. That's very basic. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, so that we are clear of what we're speaking, and some of the core principles of the convention that tie in, that highlights the importance of temporary special measures. So, but before we get into discussion around temporary measures and what they are, temporary special measures and what they are, let's just touch briefly on the convention. So for the first slide, I have here, what is a CEDAW Convention? So the convention is an international treaty that requires states parties that have ratified it or agreed to be bound by it to take action, including through laws, policies, programs, and institutions, to firstly prevent discrimination against women, and secondly achieve what the convention and committee has been talking about, substantive equality between men and women. So the next slide, we look at the CEDAW Convention, briefly giving a bit of background. It was adopted in 1979, so it's been around for a little while, and sort of also referred to as the Bill of Rights for Women. It entered into force in September 1981, and it has 89 states parties. 89 states parties have ratified. The Bahamas is a member, we've ratified, and we did so in October 1993. So we're coming up on our 30th anniversary, and hence the series, the lecture series on the convention in October. So we have had this convention as a part of our toolkit in terms of responses to gender equality and discrimination against women for quite some time now. 30 years is a bit. So we should be thinking, it's good that we're having a discussion, it's good that we're thinking about what's missing, how can we do it better? And I have to be honest with you, I'm still a little bit sort of baffled that people ask the question, well, what is CEDAW? What is that about? And why do we need to do it? Just to say that, you know, when we said that there are 189 countries, it's really globally accepted. There are 6 countries that have not ratified, the US being one, although they have signed. I think they signed under President Carter some time ago. So the principles of the convention, in the next slide, are 3. And so the convention that looks at the rights of women is talking primarily about non-discrimination. It's talking about state obligation, and it's talking about substantive equality. So these 3 principles are discussed in detail here. I really go into detail with them, as they are discussed in quite a bit of detail in the CEDAW Committee's General Recommendation 25 on Article 4. Just to say, the CEDAW Committee is a committee that was established based on the convention to review reports and to assess how states are doing in the implementation of the convention. So they're meeting, Marion just mentioned, Marion is a member. She just mentioned that she's in Geneva for a meeting now. They will review reports of states, and they will consider complaints that come from states and look at possible opportunities to engage on specific articles of the convention. And they do that, for an example, by producing general recommendations, which give us a better understanding of what a particular article of the convention is about. So General Recommendation 25 goes into Article 4, which we're discussing today. And I have to say that I will encourage all of you to take some time and look at that general recommendation. Very useful to understand the principles of the convention, to understand what is meant by general recommendations and what are the expectations of states. So I use that general recommendation as the base of this presentation. Next slide. So the principle of non-discrimination in the CEDAW Convention is about identifying and eliminating all forms of discrimination in law and in practice against all women in all fields and spheres of society. And that's very real. We're not talking about only Bahamian women have rights here. We're talking about all women in the country have rights that can be realized and should be realized under this convention. So how can we identify those things that are impeding women, stopping women, preventing them from actually realizing their rights in law and practice? And when we talk about law, we just had a referendum, as you all know, and that highlighted some of the remaining challenges we have with discrimination in law against women in this country. Women cannot pass on their nationality on equal footing as men. And that is a discrimination and an impediment to the full realization of their rights, to their nationality rights, to be able to do so with respect to their children and respect to their spouses. The principle of non-discrimination is also about accountability for acts of discrimination. So this accountability means that someone has to do something in response to acts of discrimination. We can't just say, oh, it's been that way, you know, oh, that's our culture, you know, men beat up their wives all the time. That's, you know, that's just how it is. It's okay for, you know, it's just sex between a husband and wife. There's no such thing as rape. We don't need to have any accountability measures for that, because that's just how men are. And I heard one talk show host speak about it as, you know, rough sex. It's a bit shocking to me that we're still there, but I have to say that when I traveled with the special rapporteur around the Caribbean, that also came across. One of the magistrates we met in one of the Caribbean islands we visited with the special rapporteur specifically referred to rape as just a little sex. And that was shocking for me. By the way, wasn't that long ago. It was about 5 or 6 years ago that we actually did that. So I'm not talking about, you know, 20, 30 years ago. I'm talking about still those perceptions and understanding remain for people in our society. And it baffles me that people are still, you know, making these statements on air, on the radio, and social media, and so forth. But hence we have this series and others where we're trying to ensure that we pass on as much information as possible, so that we begin to change a little bit hearts and minds and address some of those stereotypical views of women and how in relation to men. So next slide. So the convention actually defines discrimination. It's very clear on discrimination. There's no ambiguity there. It says that it's any distinction, exclusion, or restriction made on the basis of sex, which has the effect or purpose of impairing or nullifying the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise by women, irrespective of their marital status. So we're talking there about the marital rape issue very clearly. Irrespective of their marital status, they ought not to be raped, and there ought to be laws preventing it. And on the basis of equality of men and women, of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the political, economic, social, cultural, civil, and any other field in the society. So that's clearly stated. So we know what it is we're not guessing what we're talking about. We're talking clearly about the definition as defined in the convention, which states accepted as the definition that they will be bound by. So next slide. So this definition of non-discrimination, because all countries tend to have some reference to non-discrimination in their constitutions or in their national laws, where they talk about non-discrimination between men and women, or non-discrimination on grounds of sex, and it seeks to, those national laws seek to provide equal protection between men and women against discrimination or arbitrary or unfair or unjustifiable treatment or distinction. But this convention and this definition emphasizes women, right? And it looks at how women continue to suffer from various forms of discrimination because they are women. Right? We're not saying that men, we're forgetting men. And whenever we have this discussion, and I'm sure many of you in the room would have heard this same argument, what about the men? What about the rights of men? And here we're saying, we recognize that there are challenges to the realization of men's rights in some spheres, but we're speaking about here how discrimination affects women. So let's just keep the focus on women at this point. We're not saying that we're never going to look at how it relates to men, or that men are unimportant in this whole discussion around discrimination, non-discrimination. We're saying that the focus at this time is on women and how they suffer discrimination because they are women. And those types of discrimination that they tend to suffer because they're women have a lot to do with violence against the body of the woman, right? So we're talking about rape, and some of you would have heard me speak about it before in terms of how we're doing in terms of rape, in terms of violence against women globally, in terms of our ranking globally, in terms of our ranking regionally, we're among the top in terms of incidents of rape and violence against women. And we've seen during the COVID that many incidents of violence against women became real, and people saw it, and it was played out on the streets, with women being run over by cars or beaten to death, or children being beaten to death, or those types of issues that are very specific to women. And I haven't seen any statistics, but I would love to know what the statistics look like in terms of rape. I understand from the recent presentation of the Minister of National Security that crime has increased during COVID and during these last years. And I'd love to see this clear statistics on that. I'd love to see the statistics regarding teen pregnancies as a result of young girls being out of school. I'd love to see, and being locked down sometimes with their abusers. I'd love to see the statistics around domestic violence specifically, and the statistics that relate to femicide, or when we did try to do some statistics on this issue of femicide when I was at the department, it was difficult because we didn't collect statistics based on that issue. So it was just a killing. So in order to us to be able to respond, we have to be able to understand what's happening, how many women are affected, and we have to have disaggregated data that actually speaks to that. And the way that we can address issues of non-discrimination and know who's facing discrimination and where policies should be targeted is by having that data, having that disaggregated data to help us. So the definition of non-discrimination also affirms that every effort must be made to end all forms of discrimination that impede women's full realization of their rights and fundamental freedoms. So that's basically saying we can't cherry pick. So we like this right and we don't like that right. So they can have this, but they can't have that. So, you know, you can rape your wife, but you shouldn't rape women on the street. Or you can beat up your wife, but you shouldn't, you know, fight in schools. So we need to talk about non-discrimination, non-violence, and a broader tolerance levels in our society so that everyone can have the full realization of their rights and fundamental freedoms. Next slide, please. So the next principle I'll speak about briefly is the principle of state obligation. And this is important to temporary special measures because states have to do something extra. They're obliged to do something. When they ratify these conventions, they're not to just sit there on the desk of officers as, you know, wait holders or doorstops or whatever we use them for. They are to be applied. So the principle of state obligations means that states have to actively show that they are and demonstrate that they are respecting, protecting, promoting, and allowing the fulfillment of the human rights of women in their jurisdiction. So that's not a passive thing, that's actively. What are you doing actively to protect women? They're to ensure that there is no direct or indirect discrimination in laws. So I see that the government is looking again at the issue of marital rape, which is fantastic. You know, it is obliged to do so, to find ways to engage. I see that the Minister of Social Services will be meeting with members of the Christian Council and others to try to have that discussion as to what are the barriers, how can we come to some sort of agreement where women can have those rights that they're entitled to and can live a life free from violence and discrimination in this country. So the principle is about upholding the concept of due diligence. So ensuring that you investigate, that you prevent, first of all, have preventative measures in place, and that's the best form of ensuring that women are not attacked or do not have their rights violation, is to have preventative measures in place. Then you have to investigate, prosecute, and sanction discrimination. So it's about improving the de facto position of women through positive and effective policies and programs. So not just having the law. I spoke a bit about the law, but it goes beyond that. What happens in practice? Because we all know many times the laws are there, people still break the laws. We see that on the road every day, we see that people still kill, we have laws against that. So, you know, it's about going a step further. How do we ensure that women get to enjoy in a real way their rights? And there is also, states are also obliged to address prevailing gender relations and persistent gender stereotyping in this country, and to that perpetuate discrimination and inequalities. So those in addressing and taking action, that is how we will actually arrive to that state that we want to be of substantive equality. Next slide, please. So that principle of substantive equality is very crucial, and especially in terms of looking at temporary special measures. So this substantive equality is about women's de facto equality with men. What does that look like in reality? Right? You have the laws that say we can all go to school. Do boys and girls go to school equally in all parts of the country? We have a right to participate in public life. Do women and men do so equally? We have a right to join the police force. Do women and men enter at the same level? Are they promoted at the same level? Do they come to the senior ranks at the same level as those of their entry mates? Or are there barriers that limit them from doing so? So de facto equality is about women. Substantive equality is about ensuring that women and men in fact do have that equality, and that is only realizing how women are living, and if they are living the same way and supported the same way and have the same rights and privileges as men in society. So a purely legal approach is not the right approach to getting us to that de facto equality. So we have to go beyond the law. So to treat women identical to men is not the solution. A lot of persons say to me, "Oh, so you want women to be the same as men?" No, we don't. Women are women and men are men, and we're not necessarily saying that they ought to be identical in the treatment. What we're saying is that the result of the treatment ought to be the same. Right? So what they achieve, what they're able to do, what they're able to access, what they're able to claim, the result of that should put women and men at the same level in terms of equality in society. So it's about the result of those actions rather than having men and women as the same. And when I think about this, I often think of this little cartoon that I've seen, and many of you would have seen it as well. It's a cartoon sketching on equality, and it has a fence with 3 children looking over the fence or attempting to look over the fence at a game that's being played on the other side of the fence. A child is very tall and he can easily see over the fence. A second child is medium way and he probably can tiptoe and see just the top of the heads. The third child cannot see at all. So equality, people say, okay, let's just bring bring in boxes for all of them. So all 3 of them get boxes. So yeah, the one that's tall enough, did he really need a box? And the real place that we want to be at when we talk about substantive equality is no fencing, for no barriers for anyone to be able to see the game, regardless of their height. And regardless of, and so we don't have to think about the boxes, we have to think about removal of the fence when we talk about substantive equality. So those are the barriers we want to think about moving, right? We don't want to treat everyone equally because they don't all need the same things at the same time. We have to take the context and be very specific and intentional of addressing the specific concerns of the group or the minority group or the vulnerable group that you're targeting at this time. And recognizing also that women are not a homogeneous group. And so you have multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination that put women in different spaces, different places based on their color, their age, their sexual preference, their ability or disability, their education level, their weight. I've seen people saying, "Oh, I don't want, her to be on our team. She's too fat," and that still baffles me. Or we don't want her we don't want to give her that promotion because she's too old and she won't be able to keep up. And so those are the types of discrimination that we're saying that women have multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination based on not only gender, but on age and all those other things, on their status in terms of HIV. And that's a concern in terms of other areas of discrimination that women may face. And so women must be given an equal start and provided equal opportunities and have an enabling environment. And that enabling environment is not always there. So it must be created if we are to achieve equality of results. And creating that enabling environment is where we get to the issue of temporary special measures. But next slide, please. So substantive equality, and the committee is, speaks to this issue of substantive equality, and they talk about equality of results. So equality of results is the logical, and I'm quoting from the recommendation, paragraph 9, is a logical corollary of de facto or substantive equality. These results could be quantitative or qualitative in nature. This is women enjoying their rights in various fields in fairly equal numbers with men, enjoying the same income levels, if you have the same qualifications, and equality in decision-making, in political influence, and women enjoying freedom from violence. So it is when we talk about results, this is what we're aiming for. This is what we're aiming for. So it's not, again, about exact treatment, identical treatment of men and women. It is about what we want to do to advance women and ensure that they can have the kind of results that men can have. So the next slide, please. I may have made a mistake with my slides. Sorry. So we're looking at then at what are temporary special measures, right? So temporary special measures, and I don't, the convention speaks of temporary special measures, but doesn't necessarily define temporary special measures. It talks about the process. Yes. So let's go on and have a look at what temporary special measures are. So temporary special measures are a positive and proactive affirmative measures aimed at accelerating the improvement of the position of women with a view to achieving substantive equality that we talked about with men in society. So affirmative measures, and many of you would have heard of affirmative action in the context of the United States and the way in which they apply affirmative measures with respect to people of African descent and accessing certain universities and having those quotas that allow them to enter. So I don't know, 10%, 30% of certain entry positions would be given to people of African descent, so that we try to even out the historical inequalities between the minority group, in that case, people of African descent. We've also probably heard of affirmative action in the context of South Africa at the ending of apartheid, when there was a decision made that there will be, for a certain period of time in the Foreign Service, for an example, an intake of Black people, or to bring about some sort of equality of persons within their service, their public service, because of course they were underrepresented during apartheid. So it was for a period, and that period will be dictated depending on the context. So temporary special measures are aimed at achieving the structural, economic, social, cultural changes necessary to correct the past and current forms and effects of discrimination against women in the context of the convention. So it's about looking at structural, systemic discrimination against women, the economic and social and cultural changes needed to correct the discrimination against women. And people will say in this country, and I hear it all the time, but women in the Bahamas are not discriminated against. That's not true. And I encourage us to have a closer look at that. What does that mean in reality? Do we have always the same opportunities and the same equality of results as men? Look at for an example, at land rights, right? And I can think of situations where parents may decide, I'm going to give my sons land because they will have their family and they should be able to take care of their wife and their children and have land. I'm not giving my daughters any because they're going to get married and be taken care of by their man, their husband. That there is a disadvantage, and it's a direct discrimination against girls and women. Because if in the case of this woman that she happens never to get married, even if she does, it means that she has to work that much harder to prove herself to the banks, to get a loan, to ever be able to access certain, to buy a home, to be able to, and if she has children as a single mother, to be able to take care of those children. Whereas the males in this family, there's nothing stopping, by the way, the laws have been addressed in terms of equality of inheritance and so forth. But we're saying that in practice, families still consider that they want the property, the land, to remain in the name of the family and not to go to girls who may take on another name and again give the inheritance to somebody else. So there's just still in this inequality that we need to continue to fight against and to ensure that we address. So when people say that there's no inequality, look at those types of issues, right? Look at the types of issues that get us there. So why are these temporary? They're not intended to be permanent, and they should only remain in place until they are no longer necessary. Their objective of gender equality is to be sustained over time, and access and a long-term effect are made to create a more sustainable level. It is not intended to be a long-term, it's only intended to be in place until we have reached that level where women and men can have that equality, substantive equality. So next slide. So why are they special? And I always say it's not because women are special in the context of the convention, although I think that they are, but temporary special measures are designed to serve a specific goal. And that's what makes it special. It's very specific. It's not intended to cast women as weak or vulnerable or needing extra help. And we know that women are holding their own, particularly if you look at how we're doing in terms of education and education levels, outcomes and so forth. We have certainly held our own. Our successes in education have not translated into other areas. And in those other areas, for example, leadership, there may need to be special measures. So the use of special measures does not suggest a special favor for women, but it's about how do we ensure that women can get their entitlements and claim their rights and fundamental freedoms. Next slide, please. So what are measures? And we're talking about everything, essentially the actions that can be taken by states. So we're talking about legislation, executive actions, policies and practices, outreach programs, institutions that need to be set up, targeting recruitment, hiring and promotion. And I mentioned that in the context of the police force recently. I can say the same thing perhaps for the defense force. I think it'd be interesting to understand what those rates are in terms of recruitment, hiring, promotion, and arrival at senior ranks. I see that Jamaica is the only one in the region that has a female Commodore of the Defense Force. I don't know that we've had in the region any female police commissioners. I don't know how quickly they move through the rank. And so that's something that we ought to be thinking about. But those types of measures are what can we do to examine, and we ought to be examining first before we make any changes. What is the situation? And then moving forward. So we're talking about measures or actions that can bring about that substantive equality. Next slide, please. So temporary special measures, we're finally here. But all of this leads us to temporary special measures, right? As I mentioned, the convention doesn't necessarily give us the definition of temporary special measures. It talks about temporary special measures on what purposes they serve. They shall not be considered discrimination or positive discrimination as defined in the convention. So people will say, oh, when you put these temporary special measures or affirmative action, aren't you discriminating against men? Or aren't you discriminating to those who are not getting, are not benefiting from the measure that you've applied? It is not intended to be discriminate. It is not discrimination in the context of the convention discrimination. So they're saying that this temporary special measure for a temporary purpose, it is not in and of itself discrimination against a group, but it is to address unequal and separate standards that persist for women in our societies. And so what do we need to do to achieve equality? Perhaps introduce some specific measures in favor of women. And the second article talks about the adoption by the state of special measures, including those measures contained in the present convention aimed at protecting maternity. So this is really around the biological difference of men and women, and that we have to recognize because there are differences. So next slide, please. So Article 4, as I said, does not define temporary special measure, but rather refers to its purpose in the context of achieving sustainable equality in the convention, under the convention. So temporary special measures are referenced in two different articles, as we saw. in one article, 2 paragraphs, paragraph 1, paragraph 2. And those, there are similarities, but they're quite clearly different. And a lot of what I speak about relates to Article 4, paragraph 1. Next slide, please. So there is a relationship, as I said. So the purpose of Article 4.1 is to accelerate the improvement of the position of women to achieve that de facto substantive equality. The effect, to effect is structural, social, and cultural changes necessary to correct past and current forms of discrimination, and to provide them with compensation. And we haven't talked about that. Compensation. What does it mean to be compensated for past discrimination? And that is around the issue of accountability, right? And ensuring that persons are held accountable and are made to pay where persons are discriminated against. So these measures are of a temporary nature. Next slide, please. And paragraph 2 is really talking about non-identical treatment of men and women due to biological differences. And we talked about the fact that it's not a broad brush, you're treating men and women equal, and that's what we're talking about. Women should have the same thing as men always, and so forth. There may need to be specific differences because men and women are biologically different. Yes, and so we need to think about, the states ought to be thinking about what measures are they speaking about with respect to women and men that may speak specifically to the issue of the biological difference of men and women. And those are more permanent because of the biological nature of men and women. And at least those will remain for the next little while until we have some scientific or technological breakthrough that makes it possible, for example, for men to have babies and to be pregnant. So this is a clear difference. So the focus for me in this is really around paragraph 1. Next slide, please. So Article 4, in addition to how it relates paragraph 1 and 2, should be read in conjunction with the convention as a whole, particularly paragraph 6 to 16, which deals with those everyday items that we speak about: trafficking in women, political and public life, women's engagement at the international level, education, health, accessing those, economic and social life, the extent to which we can get bank loans and mortgages and inherit and financial credits from the bank, the equality before the law, marriage and family life. So all of those, we ought to be thinking how and where can temporary special measures be applied to ensure that women can realize substantive equality with men. Next slide, please. And I know that, next slide, please. So I know that when we talk about this, we have spoken about it in the context of the Bahamas quite a bit as it relates to women in politics or public life, right? But I just wanted to make that point in the earlier slide that we should be looking at it across the board in every sector. Women and men, boys and girls, treated the same? Do we need to make special think about special measures or special actions to advance the rights of women? Say, for example, women in rural areas, in terms of their access to education, access to social services, access to reproductive health and rights services, and so forth and so on. Do we need to put some measures in place? And these special measures are not to replace the regular measures that states are required to implement, that states are required to introduce to ensure compliance with the convention. So access to education for everyone, in and of itself is not intended to be a temporary special measure. But if there is a community in a particular family island where women and girls are particularly vulnerable and have not had the opportunity, then there can be a temporary special measure in that community to ensure that they are able to access their rights. So in the Bahamas, temporary special measures, I should say for the Bahamas, the committee has raised temporary special measures in the Bahamas' recent discussions with the committee in 2018, and it included temporary special measures in the recommendations the committee did in its recommendations to the Bahamas. And I encourage you to look at the recommendations of the committee. There are about 80 recommendations that the committee gave to the Bahamas on various different issues. Temporary special measures is one. And the committee specifically asked the Bahamas to make better use of temporary special measures and to apply them in certain sectors. And it also asked the Bahamas to consider introducing quotas to bring about substantive equality. Now, for us, we talk about quotas in the context of, we discussed it the other day on our show with Erin, and also the other day I had a show with Quincy Parker, and we also talked about what this means in terms of how it relates, how it works with Bahamas. So when we talk about that in terms of public life, are we talking about quotas that can be imposed by the government, that there will be 30% of seats, 50% of seats in the parliament that's going to be reserved for women? I think there's going to be a lot of pushback on that, but that's an idea of a temporary special measure. There can also be a temporary special measure where the government say to political parties, 30% of the persons that you're putting forward on your tickets each election must be 30%, right? 30%, sorry, of the persons you're putting forward must be women. It could be a voluntary thing where political parties may say, we are going to voluntarily include 30% of women on our tickets in possibly winnable seats, which that is likely to have the most positive response from political parties. But there are other ways of thinking about what can happen toward temporary special measures. Do we need to put systems in place without necessarily casting women as vulnerable and particularly needy of anything special? But are we addressing those barriers that prevent women from entering politics? Are we ensuring that women have, and I know the Department of Gender have tried in the past to introduce some additional training for women. The CWIL has also done that in terms of helping women prepare for leadership roles. So we can think about what type of temporary special measures we can introduce there. But I really would want us to think also about how can we introduce temporary special measures in other sectors that are not traditionally thought about. And I gave the example of the police or defense force. I think it'd be interesting to have an assessment of that and to do a study of where we are in terms of women leadership around the table, decision-making table of those organizations. And to assess whether we need to have temporary special measures there. Certainly there is a need for temporary special measures in the Bahamas, and I would love us to think about and perhaps discuss where we are with that and which areas we might want to consider introducing temporary special measures. Next slide, please. And I believe that's my big thank you to all of you for listening. And I'm open to your questions, by the way, having a discussion.
Thank you so much, Gaynel, for this excellent presentation. I really love that you gave us a great overview of the convention itself and kind of woven some of that information about special measures and why they are so important and why they deserve our attention. So for those joining us, this is your time to jump in with your questions, ideas, comments, challenges, whatever's on your mind. Please feel free to type into the chat, especially if you don't want your name or your face popping up on the screen. If you would like to use your mic, you can raise your hand and we will identify you just to prevent any crosstalk. We're very open to any comments and questions or any other contributions that folks have to share. And maybe I'll help everybody to warm up by asking the first question. So Gaynel, I know that you said the political quotas at the sort of national level might be challenging. People might not agree to that so easily. Have you seen it work well somewhere else? Is there another country that has political quotas and where we can see the success of this measure? You're muted.
Sorry. The usual suspect there is Rwanda, and they introduced quotas in Rwanda to bring about equality in political life. And women do make up a significant percentage of the parliament there. And I think they have some of the largest representations of women in political life in those countries. And more recently, we've seen a more voluntary leaning in the direction of that among some of the Nordic states, certainly also in New Zealand, within the cabinet. The minister has been quite keen to bring about, the prime minister has been quite keen about bringing in diversity, and that means in terms of gender, in terms of sexual preference, in terms of ethnicity. So that there's that, in addition to gender equality, they've also gone further. The same thing in Canada. They've made a tremendous effort to ensure that we have that level of diversity, and that came about with a voluntary decision that we're going to have this more representation of women. I mean, when we think about success, we think about why do we need more diversity around the table? And I contend that, you know, the more diverse ideas we have, the more likely we are to have a stronger outcome, right? If we have the less likely we are to fall into groupthink and to have this sort of one way of thinking or this tunnel vision of thinking about certain things. I often ask myself the question, I may get in trouble with this one, but I often ask myself the question, how much diversity was around the table when we decided to introduce 2 primary schools with no windows and fully air conditioned in this country? I mean, for me, if I was around the table, I would have. I mean, I know that there is definitely agreement that consensus, and you must accept as a cabinet as a whole what you're going to move forward on. But I could see if there was a more diverse cabinet at that time, I think that we might have had a different thing, where we have schools that actually can function in a way that relates to our society, our climate, that allows 5- and 6-year-olds to see outside and see the sunlight, to see the birds, to see the butterflies, and to see nature as a part of their growing, as opposed to just 4 walls and air conditioned. Oftentimes that is not working. So that's just an example, and that's not to hit on any particular administration, but that's just an example of what kind. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall to understand what type of discussions took place then, and what was the thinking of going in that direction, and what was the plan in terms of how is this going to be sustainable in terms of gas for the air condition and the whole 9 yards, and what it means in terms of how we're going to use those schools. That was just an example that I'm using in terms of why I think we need diversity around the table that could bring about a different result for the society and for the country as a whole, in terms of how we develop and how we head, how we see women and men and boys and girls joining hands toward the development of the country.
Yeah, that's a great example, and it really makes you think about the different perspectives that people bring because of their lived experiences, their identities. Exactly. That you see or may not see.
Yes.
Yeah, we all benefit from these
Yes.
different perspectives, and it helps you to go a lot deeper and come up with great solutions.
Yeah, that are more hopefully more sustainable for the country,
yes,
as we move forward in our development.
That's where we're supposed to be going, and looking at
yes,
the SDGs.
Exactly.
We're getting closer and closer to 2030.
I think we're going to need another 15 years probably. But anyway, go ahead.
Maybe. I see we have a question from Minister of State, Pia Glover. Would you like to unmute?
Good morning, ladies. I first want to apologize. There seems to be some construction going on in the building where I am. I want to thank everyone for this panel this morning. Of course, Ms. Bethel, you continue to do the great work. Ms. Curry, Ms. Wallace, all of you involved in the fight, I call it. So my point is on, of course, political involvement of women. I am a believer that it will become a voluntary as opposed to a quota imposed thing in the Bahamas. I believe that we are now modeling the behavior of women in leadership. If we think back, we said, there wasn't women in politics in the past, but because no one was modeling the behavior, we may have seen 40 years ago a Janet Bostwick or heard of Ruby Ann Darling. So this was a one-off woman. Now we see in the last general election a large number of women that have stepped forward, and now as I speak to young women, they're more inspired because now they're literally seeing, as I call it, the behavior being modeled. They're seeing she did it, I can do it. She's doing it, I can do it. I think we're also looking at internationally parliaments around the world where more women are stepping forward into political frontline. And I think through the modeling of the behavior, there's going to be a voluntary effect from that. We already hear, like I said, more young women. The youth in parliament that just recently passed had 18 young women. That is new. So the modeling of the behavior is working. We look at parliaments like, and of course, Ms. Curry, you mentioned Rwanda, which is top of the list, but also Canada in terms of the diversity. Us women having a seat at the table right now is playing a great role because we do have a different perspective on what the men think should happen. And unfortunately, we have a leader who's allowing us to bring that perspective to the table and who's considering our perspectives as they come. So I'm feeling very optimistic about a voluntary effect of us women, more women, being on the front line and having a seat at the table.
No, thank you very much for that, Minister Roll. I think you're spot on. I think it is about modeling. It is about there's something to be said also for the numbers that you have, and that you're not just a lone voice sort of around the table. And when you can have that, when you can have a number of women putting issues forward, I think it makes a difference in the outcome. And certainly this administration has done well in terms of the number of women and the quality of work that I see coming out of the women, out of their portfolios. It seems very positive to date, I have to say. And I'm encouraged as well about what I see there. I think we do need to continue to work at modeling, but continue to ensure that we have systems in place to encourage women to go in there, to remove the barriers that impede them, to better understand why they're not coming forward in larger numbers, or why they're not getting the safe seats in all of the political parties. So a large number of women participated in the last election, I have to say. I recall that a significant number of women participated with candidates and so forth. So I think that's very positive. And as I mentioned, also the work done by CEDAW and others, it's is a step in the right direction. We have struggled with temporary special measures. When I was at the department, there was always this question, what do we need to do? How can we do that? We're not going to do quotas. What else can we do? And I think that idea of modeling and looking at other opportunities to have more women around the table, we should continue to think about that and see how we can do that even more. And to build on what is currently happening. Thank you. Thank you, Minister.
And that also made me think about what we looked at CSW, the Commission on the Status of Women 65. So last year, the focus was on women in public and political life. And I remember that the CARICOM preparatory statement to CSW 65 really focused on the importance of creating an enabling environment for women to participate in public life, in political life, and be on the front line of politics. So really, I think we need to spend some time thinking about what that means to create that enabling environment. And that includes things like ensuring that there's childcare, right? Mm-hmm. Because women have significant burden of domestic and care work. So if we could balance that better within families, then women have the time and the energy to put forward into public life. And that's just one example. I see that we have a question from Judith from Belize. Please jump in here, Judith.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for allowing us to get into your conversation. I really want to thank Gaynel for that very excellent presentation. And this whole area of temporary special measures is something that I'm always very interested in. I really do support the ideas around, looking at things from a systemic point of view and trying to create that in the living environment. Because my question is, and I know, this goes along with my thinking that I fully agree and understand, maybe from a more, definitely from a philosophical standpoint, why temporary special measures are necessary, especially when it comes to women's political participation. I mean, we're living that and believe in terms of struggling on this issue back and forth. But I wondered about the thoughts on, this idea that I've heard in various areas, and it's a preoccupation of mine, of when you put in things like quotas and so forth, particularly in countries where the patriarchy is so strong, where there's still traditional values that prevail, that it becomes an issue of kind of tokenism. Yeah, that you have these quotas, and the men basically kind of conspire to put women who are, would be more open to being, controlled, to use that term. So there are various discussions that I've participated in and heard about, and I have to admit that it's my preoccupation as well, and wondered what the thoughts around the whole issue of tokenism, that quotas and other legal requirements like that can just lead to political parties just ticking the box, and it doesn't really open the spaces for women who it's a leveling of playing field, and women of merit could get in, but really they're putting in puppets in the seat. And I know that in itself has its own connotation, but I just wanted to put that on the table to ask that and ask about thoughts about around that.
No, thank you very much for Judith. I think, Judith, for that question, I think the issue of tokenism is very important for us to think about. And that comes up a lot in the context of temporary special measures. The idea is not around, the idea is really about addressing past injustices and past discrimination and inequalities that have impeded women from entering certain fields, right? This perception around women as weaker, this perception of women as not being leaders, this perception of women as lesser, and that intensifies when you add in the multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination. And being a Black woman in the international arena was very clear to me, those issues as they came forward. As you step into the room, even in 2022, there's this question, this Black woman from this small island developing state, is she really, and then you go to the testing, she's a woman, can we trust her? She's a woman, she's a Black woman, or she's a whatever, a woman with a disability. So when we talk about taking down those barriers, it's to allow women temporarily to compete on equal footing as men. Many times they don't have that opportunity to compete on equal footing, right? And we would want to say, and I kind of, people often don't get it when we speak about gender, but it's the same inequalities between men and women. Women weren't always in the work field. Women weren't always in the classrooms. Women weren't always, out there in public life. They were at home with their children and raised and with their families. So now they have entered the public sphere. And there is a perception that we ought to be pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps, regardless. So as I mentioned to you already, the issue of inheritance, right? And what happens on an individual level. Remember that we're talking about individual, institutional, systemic discrimination that women face. So you are now competing with your brother, for an example, who now has a piece of property that's valued something, so he can step up to the bank and automatically get a loan, which you can't do. So you know, that's already out the gate, you're disadvantaged, right? And so yes, you should pull yourself up by your bootstraps and work harder to be able to afford the down payment for your house because you happen to be a woman. And that is where the challenge comes in when we talk about tokenism, when we talk about, and that happens on so many different levels in the workspaces as well. Women often find themselves paid less. Women often have to negotiate that much harder for promotions, and they take longer to move up the ranks. And so to say, we're not saying that we want them to, they're so vulnerable and delicate and you need to, you know, help them along the way and there's a token, let's help her up. No, it's about removing the barriers that prevent us, or eliminating those barriers that prevent us to be able to achieve on equal footing. I want to be able to achieve on equal footing financially, economically, politically, socially, as every other man in my country. I want to be able to pass my nationality on to every single, to my child on equal footing as my brothers or my uncles, right? Or my cousins who happen to be male. And so we're not talking about just saying, oh, let's choose a few women and help them out and they need to be helped. We're talking about dealing with and being honest as a society about those systemic inequalities and discrimination, about gender stereotyping and biases that we hold and perceptions that we have in our mind that happens when children are right out of the womb. They're either boy, girl, let's start preparing them this way, we're going to help them this way, and so forth. And so those differences, what we're saying is we have to really address those. And when you look at it in those terms, I think that it's difficult to see it as tokenism, but rather as for a time period, we're trying to address the inequalities of the past. And it's the same thing that happens with racism, by the way. And there have been lots of lawsuits from whites and others in the US, for example, who said that they have been discriminated against because there's a quota for blacks and they have not been allowed to be able to compete for that 30% of the seats. So there's always that challenge and that we have. And again, it's temporary, it's for a time period, and it's for a specific reason, purpose, to get to a certain level of equality within our societies. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think it's to create a culture and to get people used to seeing women in particular positions, and definitely not the full-on solution. We still have other work to do.
Definitely in other areas.
But we have people who are dedicated to the things that we are dedicated to as a people and who believe in things like human rights and gender equality, and not just people who just look like us, but don't really believe in us being on the same level as them, right? I think that's kind of where there's more work to be done. We have to figure out what we're going to do along with quotas, because the last thing we want to do is to elect a bunch of people that tick a box, like Judith said.
Precisely. And it's not just about having women. Also, it's about having women that also, as you said, rightly said, Alicia, women that promote the rights of women, that recognize these issues of the particular concerns and issues that put women's issues on the table. And there are specific issues that we'd love to have on the table around equality. And I mentioned a couple of them, but I'll also add in the issues around, and it comes up in marital rape, but also in terms of other forms of reproductive health and rights around services and minimum age requirements and inequalities between boys and girls and so forth. So there's a lot of work to be done, and the temporary special measures are not intended to solve all the problems, but I think what the committee is saying is look at how you can use them and where you can use them and take advantage of them.
And keeping in mind that women are not a homogenous group.
Yes.
We're all different and having different experiences. So if we have a bunch of wealthy women in Parliament, they're not thinking about the condition of women who are experiencing poverty, right? We want to see also women with disabilities. And that actually made me think a minute ago about the way that we already have temporary special measures, but we don't call them that. So I believe it's in the Employment Act, right? Where if you employ over a certain number of people, a certain percentage of those should be people with disabilities. And maybe that's not something that people generally know, that's not something that's discussed, but it's a temporary measure and it's a necessary one. And this what we're talking about is yet another. I see we have another
Yes.
contribution from Minister Glover. Please go ahead.
So absolutely, thank you. I have to agree with Ms. Curry in that it's not only about having women, but having women who are committed to the cause and understand what the causes are. You know, we're not just filling quotas. We have to fill quotas with persons who will advance and advocate for the cause of all. You know, we say rights are human rights. I believe that I know that there's strength in numbers. So that's why the work of CWIL, Women United, Equality Bahamas, all of the organizations is so important. I'm very proud to see, even in our Caribbean Women Parliamentarian Group, we're 7 women on the government side, but there's so much more with 5 others because we have a great bipartisan relationship. So I'm speaking to relationships. I'm speaking to the fact that as women support women, as women come together and discuss the causes and have a united front on them, have a united advocacy, that is also another thing that will strengthen the work. The bipartisan relationship between women in Parliament right now, the upper and lower house, is excellent. That's another form of modeling the behavior. Yes, we are on opposite sides of the divide, but we choose to come together for the cause. And that strength and unity is very critical. The continued learning and understanding what the causes are. And of course, having the conversations with all of the groups, the advocacy groups, to understand, you know, while we have the seat at the table, what is it that we should be advancing and not operating in a vacuum?
Yes. Yes. Thank you for that. I completely agree. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Minister. Yeah.
I think we had some comments in the chat. Lauren, could you read those for us, please?
Yes, we had a comment from Thomas Ferguson who says, good presentation, a lot of great topics presented and much food for thought. Land has a lot of inequalities, especially for the poor. So maybe this can be explored a bit more. And he also said land is given to women as a dowry and men don't have the same rights. Men are at a disadvantage in land.
Great, thank you for that. Yeah, I think land is a complicated issue in the Bahamas.
It is.
We could have a whole section on.
Yeah, and it is, and it's one that people get, and I mean, I use it a lot because I know of people that went through this, and you know, where again, it's nothing necessarily in law. That's what we talk about, you know, de facto actual inequalities that women face, where they have to struggle to find housing, to get their own property, to come up with the savings. If you would convince the bank to give them a loan, in the past they had to come with their father or brother or somebody else to get that. So there's progress. At least you can go on your own now, but you better have your funds. And so it makes a difference when you don't have the possibility to inherit. I mean, in fact, you know, inheritance means something because it automatically puts some people in a better position than others, and we're just saying that that's a window that we can think about looking at as to how, when we say there's no inequality in society, there is, and we look at those, and then it adds on when it comes to the point that Alicia raised earlier about caregiving. It's not only about children, it's about elderly and other sick members of the family. It comes up when it comes to work, in the workspaces, the extent to which women are protected, respected, and promoted within their work environments, to the extent to which they're allowed, they're given the same in terms of pay for equal work and equal qualifications and so forth and so on, have equal opportunities. They add up, they build on. It's like individually it may seem like, you know, okay, that's one issue and that's a very isolated issue, but start thinking about how the cumulative effect of this and how those intersecting issues that women face, that's a particular burden. And then you add on the issue that I just mentioned about reproductive health, where you don't have entirely control over your own body. When persons may say when you may or may not, engage in intercourse, have a child, not have a child, all of that is depending. There are also some limitations there in terms of the rights of women, in terms of be able to freely determine those issues on their own. So cumulatively, it begins to get heavy. When we isolate it and look at the one issue, yeah. But let's try to think about those multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination and see where we can make some inroads, and not get stuck on the issue of quotas, because it's not only about quotas, it's about a number of other things we ought to do, ought to be thinking, and how could we be creative about temporary special measures. And I think there's a reason why the committee has been, so open about it, encouraging state to think about. They want you to come up with what is relevant to your context and how creative that you can be with the participation with all members of the society, or as representational as possible members of your society around the table.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Gaynel, for this session, for an incredible presentation, one that I'm sure that people will find really helpful looking at the recording. So when the recording is available, it will be at tiny.cc/CEDAW for recording. I put in the chat the links for previous recordings, but you can find them all on YouTube. You just search CEDAW Speaker Series, look up Equality Bahamas. They will come up. The next session will be held on July 23rd at 10 a.m. That is the Bahamas time, so 9 a.m. in Jamaica. And you can register for that already at tiny.cc/CEDAW5. That's the number 5. And we will be joined by Vandana Rana, who is a current member of the CEDAW committee based in Nepal. And we'll be looking at stereotyping and prejudice, which links to this conversation that we've been having today. Yeah. Yeah. So again, Gaynel, thank you so much for being here with us and for bringing your expertise and really breaking it down and helping us to understand why temporary special measures are important and what they really mean by that term when the committee uses it. And thank you to Marian Bethel for all of the help with coordinating this, for accessing the right people to come and talk to us about each of these articles. This is an ongoing series in the lead up to the 30th anniversary, of the Bahamas ratification of CEDAW, which we will be acknowledging in October of 2023. So every month until then, we'll be looking at an article, and when we finish all the articles, we'll be looking at the optional protocol as well as some of the general recommendations. So you might remember that Gaynel mentioned General Recommendation 25, which is specific to Article 4. So you can go and look for that. That link is also in the chat. Stay tuned for other events that are coming up. We do more than just the CEDAW Speaker Series, which is, of course, very important. We really need to understand these mechanisms and how we can use them to advance the rights of women, to move toward gender equality, and to expand as we promote and actually increase access to human rights. So stay tuned. Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, you can find us at Equality242. Thank you, Lauren, for being here with us and helping with all of the technical stuff and monitoring the chat. And thank you all for joining us. And we're really looking forward to seeing you again on July 23rd and maybe even before that for Women's Wednesdays, which is usually the first Wednesday of the month at 6 p.m. Everything is on Zoom. So as long as you have internet access, you can join us. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday and the weekend. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening. Thank you for having me, Alicia.